Hi, I'm Shan Wu with an undercolor of law question, which is, did the U.S. Supreme Court strike a great blow for the protection of Americans when it backed up the Trump regime's stopping massive U.S. government airlifts of illegal aliens into the United States? Well, you would think that if you listened to the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller. Now, we'll hear from Miller in a second and break down what he claims versus what is the truth. Because that's what we do on Legal AF. We're separating truth from fantasy here in the legal and the political world, and we hope that you'll join with us and support us, make us the biggest and best legal analysis, political analysis channel that there is. So hit that subscribe button. Now, back to Mr. Stephen Miller. Let's take a listen to how he describes what has happened here. Talk to you on the other side.
But more specifically, it's the program. This is a very important point because this context is often missing. It's the program that was launched by the Biden administration to fly illegal aliens into the country by aircraft. So when you hear about migrant flights, when you hear about illegal aliens being flown into the country, there were other programs too. They had a flying program they had a free transportation program for hundreds of thousands of illegals at the border that was run out of DHS and funded by FEMA. They had a separate program for UAC, unaccompanied alien children. But when you think about the, mostly when people are talking about the migrant flights, they're talking about this program, the fly-ins for these illegal aliens. About 500,000 illegal aliens from those four countries, particularly in the last 2 years of the Biden administration, were flown directly into American cities and towns. So, of course, we revoked those, they called it parole for those individuals, amnesty basically. And now, of course, they're all subject to deportation from the United States. And, of course, self-evidently, of course, they have to be deported. You can't have a situation where the Biden administration can fly in 500,000 illegal aliens in the last 24 months, and we're having a conversation about, oh, maybe they should get to stay for life. They've been here for 24 months. They were flown into our country illegally. And the good news is the airplanes travel in two directions. Next question.
So Miller's saying, of course they have to be deported. Of course they have to be deported. He's talking about these illegal aliens being flown to U.S. cities. Does that make any sense that the Biden administration hold off on the history of the whole program that they're trying to get rid of? Does it make any sense that the Biden administration just wants to find dangerous criminals from other countries and drop them into U.S. cities? That's certainly what Trump seems to think. Like, why? Because they hate America, they want to destroy it? I mean, honestly, mainstream media has numbed us to these statements that could easily be derided as being delusional from the president and his spokespeople. You know, maybe they're not delusional. Why not ask him and them about it? Like, what is the theory here of why anyone would be doing that? What does Trump, mean that the Biden and liberal ideas want to do this? Why would they want to airlift illegal, dangerous aliens into the United States? Why isn't anybody asking these questions? Some people have asked them. Jim Acosta on CNN, when he was on CNN, did ask Stephen Miller about the whole notion of what immigration represents in the U.S. Miller obviously disagreed with him, and now Jim has left CNN. So, back to what Miller's saying. He is talking about these are fly-ins for illegal aliens. No, let's look at what the program, which is the parole program, actually is under the U.S. immigration law. And let's go to a good source, right, which is the government's own website. And it's called humanitarian parole. Here's the definition. Individuals, we'll put it up for you, individuals who are outside of the United States may be able to request parole into the United States based on urgent humanitarian reasons or a significant public benefit. All right, where's the word illegal in there? It's not there, right? It goes on to describe what is parole. So the USCIS, Customs Immigration Service, uses its discretion to authorize parole. That means a person, an individual, who may be inadmissible or otherwise ineligible for admission, can be allowed into the U.S. for this temporary period. They call it parole. And they use their discretion to consider these points, like why would you want to come in here? You might have a problem like those who seek asylum formally. This is slightly different. If you're in danger in your country, there's a medical necessity or other human benefits to doing that, it's humanitarian. Couple of really important points. People also tend to get work permits under these programs, all right? So these aren't people coming in just living off of, the dole of the land here. They're coming here and they get to work. They get temporary employment authorizations. Not only that, a really important factor that the government puts on its own website, a really important factor is whether they have a financial supporter, meaning you have to present evidence that there's somebody here in the country who is willing to give you financial support, and obviously that person's credentials, background is an important factor. So the idea that it's just folks coming in here who are just going to be a drain, forget the ridiculous idea that they're actually criminals coming in here, it just isn't there. This is a program which is meant to help people who need the help, and they're going to be working here most of the time. Most people want to work here. They don't want to come here and have no job, no income. They're going to pay taxes, and they have people who are ready to stand at their side to financially support them until they can get on their feet. Miller and Trump would like you all to think, us all to think, that this is some new-fangled, woke idea. It's not. It's 7 decades old. As CNN reports, the parole program dates back to the Eisenhower era in the 1950s. It began then. It started there because post-World War II, the Eisenhower administration paroled tens of thousands of people who were fleeing from Hungary during a Soviet crackdown after World War II. They can legally live in the country, as they did then, typically for 2 years. It's like a temporary kind of position. In 2023, the Biden administration announced it was doing a parole program for migrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, which is often then referred to by its acronym, the CHNV. So you hear that bandied about. They were required to have an American sponsor, as we talked about, the financial support, and they had to clear security vetting. Right? So, first day in office, Trump signs an order ending that program. Now, as everyone agrees in reporting states, no one disputes that Homeland Security does have the authority to grant or revoke parole status. After all, they're running the immigration processes, including these programs. But the question is whether you can revoke the status for all people immediately with a stroke of the pen, or whether you have to conduct like a case-by-case review. After all, they were first granted the parole. And that's where the kind of legal fight has been happening. And a number of advocacy groups have pointed out the important factors that are considered first before the parole is granted. Are they receiving medical treatment? Are they going to be an organ donor, visiting, caring for a sick relative, attending a funeral, coming to the United States for protection from targeted or individualized harm? Is there a significant public benefit to it? Now, when you look back at the 7 decades of how this has been used, and it wasn't just for Hungary, Cuba, there's a whole medical professional parole program going on. I think what you'll see, and we'll put up some more stats for you in a moment, that it's really something that is not only a gesture of mercy to help people, but it really has helped the quality of life in the United States. It's very obvious when you look at that. I mean, if you look at the 60s and 70s, over 690,000 Cubans, almost 360,000 refugees from Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos were paroled into the United States. Another 130,000 refugees from the Vietnam War era were admitted through parole. There's a Refugee Act enacted in 1980, which includes a provision limiting the authority of the Attorney General to parole people if there's some public interest that you should or should not be let in. The point of all this is not some haphazard idea that just gets thrown up there by people saying, oh, we just want to bring in a bunch of illegals. It's completely the opposite of that. It's something that's been thought out, that has a process, always an alien word to the Trump administration, and it's been in place for decades, almost 70 years. So the Trump administration went to the Supreme Court on an emergency basis, as usual, because they wanted to terminate this parole status. Now, why did they have to go to the Supreme Court? Let's look at the legal status for a moment. Because as they tried to do this, a group of migrants who benefited from this sued. And up in Boston, a federal district court stayed the Trump attempt to stop this program. And then the Federal Court of Appeals also agreed with them. This is part of like some 12 emergency appeals that have been reaching the Supreme Court since Trump got to office in January, we've talked about this sort of abusive use of the emergency docket. And yet again, this is the shadow docket. This was not fully briefed and litigated through the lower courts. Everything came up on a fast-track basis. There was a stay by the lower court. It was affirmed by the Court of Appeals. And what Trump asked the Supreme Court to do here is to stay the stay, right? And that's what the Supreme Court did. This is, as we've discussed, a terrible misuse of the emergency docket. And I did a piece recently in the Daily Beast talking about this in other cases, and we'll just put up one piece of that writing for now, which is, I say, the unprecedented increase in the use of the emergency docket, it undermines the lower courts and the processes that are put in place. As the Hill publication put it, quote, "Forget 9/11. When the Trump administration has an emergency, it just calls 9 justices, that is. The High Court has some sort of conceit going on that they are the ones to take on all these cases." And I'll go back to my piece, and I quote, that the High Court's ability to act fast, it thinks, negates the need for lower courts to issue nationwide injunctions, because it's really getting at the nationwide injunction issue. What this is going to make happen if fully implemented, is the Supreme Court's not going to be the court of last resort, but the court of only resort. They want to be the only court around. This particular shadow docket decision, their analysis of the merits before they unfreeze it and allow all these folks to get deported, 1 paragraph, no reasoning whatsoever. The dissent by Jackson and Sotomayor, to say that scathing would be an enormous understatement. We'll put it up for a second. What they're really taking exception to is the way that the majority turned the normal legal standard on its head. They point out that, in particular, you have to show the irreparable harm, and as usual, that's completely flipped on its end. And also, they point out an important legal nuance, which is the burden's particularly heavy to get rid of a stay when the Court of Appeals has already said, yeah, you should stay this action. The irreparable harm that the United States is trying to articulate here is that it somehow infringes upon the executive's authority to run the immigration program. And if you use a common sense approach here of the balance, how does that compare to the consequences for all these people who are harmed? Hundreds of thousands of people who have a life here, who have been legally granted the ability to come here for humanitarian reasons. They now face a very difficult decision. Do they now self-deport here? Do they wait to get basically arrested by ICE and then kicked out? That's the kind of balancing that should have happened from the majority, but they didn't do that at all. So, you really have to wonder, what is the point of what's happening here, right? I mean, Stephen Miller and his kind of people certainly have a ideology involved. They hate people. They're very racist. They want the country to look like what they think it should look like. Trump goes along with it, I mean, maybe because he's not smart enough to actually understand that there is no criminal army invading the United States, or perhaps more likely, he simply wants to be liked or favored from his campaign promises, wants to play into this hatred of the base so that they feel he's doing something about these fictitious, dangerous armies of illegal people, criminals. And maybe it's more interesting for him to do something like that than to actually try to govern things or help people. Maybe it also plays into his personal hatreds, his misogynies as well. I mean, it certainly does not consider the harm being done to, in this case, nearly 500,000 people. And it does not consider the harm being done to our country and the institutions, all the good benefits we get from people coming here, and all the good benefits all of us get from there being just, fair, humane practices. It's all being cast aside. So we'll keep an eye on this and the other cases. I'm sure this won't be the last emergency docket, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks again for all the comments. I try to get back to you when I can, but really appreciate the input. Talk to you soon.
I'm Michael Popok, and I got some big news for our audience. Most of you know me as the co-founder of Midas Touch's Legal AF and the Legal AF YouTube channel, or as a 35-year national trial lawyer. Now, building on what we started together on Legal AF, I've launched a new law firm, the Popok Firm, dedicated to obtaining justice through compassionate and zealous legal representation. At the Popak firm, we are focused on obtaining justice for those who have been injured or damaged by a life-altering event, by securing the highest dollar recoveries. I've been tirelessly fighting for justice for the last 35 years, so my own law firm organically building on my Legal AF work just feels right. And I've handpicked a team of top-tier trial fighters and settlement experts throughout all 50 states known as big auto injury attorneys who have the know-how to beat heartless insurance companies, corporations, government entities, and their attorneys. Big Auto's attorneys working with my firm are rock stars in their respective states and collectively responsible for billions of dollars in recoveries. So if you or a loved one have been on the wrong side of a catastrophic auto, motor vehicle, rideshare, or truck accident, suffered a personal injury, or been the victim of medical malpractice, employment harassment or discrimination, or suffered a violation of your civil and constitutional rights, then contact the Popak firm today at 1-877-POPAK-AF or by visiting my website at www.thepopakfirm.com and fill out a free case evaluation form. And if we determine that you have a case and you sign with us, we don't get paid unless you do. The Popak firm, fighting for your justice every step of the way.